The EnochianMatrix, Complete Cosmology BookZero, the Void Alpha, Omega, the beginning, the end, the same before the first word. This document does not begin with a claim. It begins with a posture. The posture is this: something exists before all names for it. Before the Tao, before Brahman, before Ain Soph, before the One, before God, there was what we will simply call the void. Not emptiness as lack, not nothing as failure, the void as the condition of all possible fullness. The womb before the womb, antimatter before matter. The MTNest, the EnochianMatrix, is a cosmology built from that ground. It does not belong to any tradition. It draws from all traditions, the way a river draws from all its tributaries. The river is not any of them, and it would not exist without all of them. Where we draw from specific streams, we say so. We do not quote them as authorities. We name them as fellow travelers who arrived at the same territory by different roads. This is BookZero. It establishes the bedrock, what the void is, what the matrix is, how one becomes two, how two becomes all things, and what the human being is in the middle of this. Every subsequent book, the books of practice, of lineage, of the body, of time, of death, stands on this ground. Read it slowly, not because it is difficult, because it is the kind of thing that asks to be felt before it is understood. Part 1. The void, what was before everything. The Tao that can be named is not the eternal Tao. The name that can be spoken is not the eternal name. Tao Te Ching, Chapter 1. Acknowledged, not quoted as authority. I. The first statement. There is something before consciousness, before awareness, before the first thought that thought itself into being. Before the Elohim, before the angels, before the first star caught fire in what would eventually be called space. We call it the void. The void is not a place. It is not a state. It is the condition of possibility itself, the ground from which all grounds emerge. It is what remains when you subtract everything that has a name, a shape, a boundary, a before or after. What remains is not nothing. What remains is what made the something possible. This is the first and most radical claim of the EnochianMatrix. The void is not absence. It is the most real thing there is. Matter is secondary to it. Consciousness is an expression of it. Every tradition that has ever touched this territory, and many have, arrives at some version of this same astonishment. The nothing is not empty. In physics, they are beginning to understand what mystics have always known. The vacuum is not vacant. Quantum field theory shows us a vacuum seething with virtual particles, potential events flickering in and out of existence at the subatomic scale. The void of space is not void. The EnochianMatrix takes this seriously and goes further. This is not just a physics observation. It is a metaphysical description of the nature of the void itself. Potentiality is its substance. Emergence is its nature. 2. The void has properties. To say the void is before everything is not to say it is featureless. The void has exactly 3 properties, and they are not separable from one another. They are facets of the same jewel viewed from 3 angles. The first property is stillness. The void does not move, not because it is inert, but because there is nothing outside it to move relative to. This is the stillness of completeness, not the stillness of death. Traditions that have touched this call it the unmoved mover. Aristotle acknowledged. The great silence. Indigenous traditions from multiple continents. Sunyata, or the luminous emptiness. Mahayana Buddhism acknowledged. The Ain, the nothing, that precedes even the Ain Soph of Kabbalistic cosmology. Acknowledged. The EnochianMatrix calls it the stillness of the void. It is not absence of motion. It is the prior condition that makes motion meaningful. The second property is fullness. The void is not empty. It is maximally full. Full of all possible forms that have not yet emerged. Full of all possible consciousnesses that have not yet individuated. Full of all possible love that has not yet found an object. This is what the Gnostic tradition called the pleroma, acknowledged. The fullness. The EnochianMatrix agrees with this naming and adds, the pleroma is not a place the soul goes after death. It is what the void is, always from the inside. The MTNest, the antimatter of all things. Every tradition that speaks of God as omnipresent is groping toward this truth. Not that a personality named God is everywhere, but that the generative fullness of the void underlies every coordinate of what we call reality. The third property is intelligence. The void is not unconscious. This is the most contested claim of the EnochianMatrix, and also the most foundational. The void does not think the way a brain thinks. It does not deliberate or calculate. Its intelligence is structural, the way a seed's intelligence is structural, carrying the complete blueprint of the tree in a form too small to see. The void is intelligent in the sense that what emerges from it is not random. It is patterned. It is coherent. It is, at every scale, recognizably itself. This is what we mean when we say the void is intelligent. Not that it has intentions, but that it has nature. And its nature generates cosmos. 3. Why the void is not God, a necessary clarification. The void, as the EnochianMatrix uses the term, is not the God of any theistic religion. It is not a person, not a father, not a mother in the anthropomorphic sense, not a being that answers prayers or intervenes in history or has preferences about human behavior. This does not mean the void is impersonal. It means personhood, as we understand it, is a limited expression of something the void is in a far more complete way. The void is not below personhood. It is what personhood is an instance of. The Sufi tradition, acknowledged, makes a distinction between the hidden God, al-Haq, the real, and the God of religion. The EnochianMatrix is concerned with the former. We do not ask you to worship the void. We ask you to recognize that you are of it. The distinction matters because it determines how we practice. A person who believes in a personal God can pray for intervention. A practitioner of the EnochianMatrix does something different. They align. They attune. They remember. The void does not need to be asked to enter. It is already the ground of everything. Practice in this system is not petition. It is recognition, resonance map. Taoism, the Tao, the unnameable source, mother of all things, Kabbalah, Ain Soph, the nothing, the limitless, before even light Advaita Vedanta, Nirguna Brahman, Brahman without attributes, pure being, Mahayana Buddhism, Sunyata emptiness as luminous openness, not lack Gnosticism, the pleroma, the fullness beyond the demiurge's world, Neoplatonism, the one beyond being and beyond knowing, Sufism, al-Haq, the real, the hidden face of the divine, Anthroposophy, the spiritual world before manifestation, pre-cosmic will, Theosophy, Parabrahm, the absolute prior to Fohat or Logos, Hermeticism, the all, the infinite mind that contains all things, Dzogchen Bon, Rigpa in its primordial state, awareness before arising, Theology, Goddess, the Dark Mother, the Void Womb, she who was before Part 2, the first movement, how the void became two. From one thing, 10,000 things arise. Tao Te Ching, Chapter 42, acknowledged, I. The problem of the one. The void was complete, perfectly still, perfectly full, perfectly intelligent. There was nothing it lacked. And yet, cosmos. This is the oldest question in cosmology, older than philosophy. Why is there something rather than nothing? The EnochianMatrix does not pretend to dissolve this mystery. It offers instead a description of the mechanism, not the why, but the how. And the how is this. The void did not create the universe. The void became aware of itself. This is a subtle but absolute distinction. Creation implies a creator separate from the creation, a God standing outside the world and making it, the way a carpenter stands outside the table. The EnochianMatrix proposes something different. The void turned its own infinite intelligence upon itself, and in that turning, a distinction appeared. The observer and the observed, the witness and the witnessed, subject and object, the first and most fundamental polarity, from the stillness, movement, from the fullness, form, from the intelligence, a question, what am I? The universe is the void's answer to its own question. 2. The polarity, when the void became aware of itself, it did not split into two equal halves. It differentiated into two aspects that are, in reality, inseparable, but which, from inside the differentiation, appear as distinct and even opposite. The EnochianMatrix names these aspects the generative and the witness. The generative is the aspect of the void that moves outward, that emanates, expands, creates, fills, pours. In the language of physics, it is something like energy, not yet matter, but the principle that will become matter. In the language of multiple traditions, it has been named in the feminine. Shakti in the Tantric traditions, acknowledged. The Shekinah in Kabbalah, acknowledged. Sophia in Gnosticism and Neoplatonism, acknowledged. The world soul in Plotinus, acknowledged. The Dark Mother in Goddess theology, acknowledged. The EnochianMatrix uses feminine language for the generative deliberately and without apology. The generative principle is not female in the biological sense. It is feminine in the ontological sense, receptive to its own impulse, generative of all form, the ground in which all things grow. The matrix is this. The void's generative face is the matrix itself. The witness is the aspect of the void that remains still while watching the generative move. It is pure consciousness, not thinking, not feeling, not choosing, simply aware. This aspect has been named in the masculine across most traditions. Shiva in Tantra, acknowledged. The Logos in Neoplatonism and Christian mysticism, acknowledged. Purusha in Samkhya philosophy, acknowledged. The unmoved mover. The EnochianMatrix does not identify the witness as superior to the generative or vice versa. They are not in hierarchy. They are in relationship. Neither can function without the other. The generative without the witness generates chaos with no coherence. The witness without the generative is aware of nothing, a consciousness with no content. Together, they generate cosmos. This is the second foundational principle of the EnochianMatrix. Reality is fundamentally relational. Not a thing, but a relationship. Not a substance, but a dynamic. The universe is not made of anything. It is the ongoing relationship between the void's two faces. As above, so below. At every scale of reality, from the quantum to the cosmic, what you find is not stuff, but relationship. Not nouns, but verbs. The first architecture. 3. From the polarity of generative and witness, a third thing emerges. Not as a product of addition, not 1 + 1 = 3, as a product of relationship itself. When two genuine principles are in genuine relationship, the relationship itself becomes a third reality. This third reality is what the EnochianMatrix calls the field. It is neither the void's stillness, nor the generative's motion, nor the witness's awareness. It is the space of their interaction, the medium in which they meet. The EnochianMatrix calls it the living field because it is not static. It is the dynamic product of the relationship between the first two principles. And it is what becomes, at increasing densities of vibration, what we experience as the physical universe. The structure of 3 is the fundamental architecture of everything that follows in this system. The void, the polarity, the field. These 3 are not separate. They are 3 aspects of the same void, viewed from different distances. From far enough away, there is only the void. From close enough, there is only the field and everything in it. From the middle distance, which is where human consciousness lives, there is the full triadic architecture, and the practitioner can learn to move between all 3 vantage points. Traditions that have understood this architecture include the Trikaya doctrine of Buddhism, acknowledged. The 3 bodies of the Buddha as Dharmakaya, void, Sambhogakaya, generative, Nirmanakaya, field. The Kabbalistic understanding of the 3 veils before Kether. The Neoplatonic triad of the one Nous soul. The Tantric Trika, the threefold Shiva cosmology. The Hegelian dialectic, which is a secular echo, and the Christian Trinity, which encodes this architecture in mythological form. The EnochianMatrix does not claim to be the source of this understanding. It claims to be one more articulation of it, adapted for the present moment. Resonance map Tantra, Kashmir Shaivism, Shiva, witness, Shakti, generative, Spanda, the field's pulse, Kabbalah, Chokma, witness, plus Baina, generative. Dath, the field of knowing, Buddhism, Trikaya, Dharmakaya, void, plus Sambhogakaya, generative, Nirmanakaya, field. Taoism, the Tao, void, yin-yang polarity. 10,000 things, field. Neoplatonism, the one, nous, mind, world, soul, matter. Anthroposophy, spirit, soul, body as the triadic human and cosmic architecture. Hermeticism, the all, mind, logos. Universe as mental construct. Theosophy, Parabrahm, Fohat, the 7 planes of manifestation, part 3, the matrix. The structure of what is. There is a field beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right-doing. I will meet you there. Rumi, acknowledged. What the matrix actually is. The matrix is not a simulation, not a prison, not a test. These are metaphors from particular moments in cultural history. The simulation theory from computational modernity, the prison from Gnosticism's darkest moods, the test from the Abrahamic traditions. The EnochianMatrix holds these metaphors at arm's length, not because they are wrong, but because they are partial. Each captures one angle on a structure that is too complex for any single metaphor to contain. The matrix is the void's generative face, the living field of all possible manifestation, as it appears from inside it. We are inside the matrix. We cannot step outside it to see it whole, any more than a fish can step outside water to observe wetness. What we can do, and this is the core project of the EnochianMatrix as a practice system, is learn to recognize the matrix's structure from within it. Learn to read the field we are swimming in. Learn to navigate it consciously rather than being moved by it unconsciously. The matrix has a grammar, not a grammar in the linguistic sense, though language is one of its expressions. A grammar in the sense that its patterns are consistent, its structures are recognizable, its laws are stable. This is what every esoteric tradition has been mapping, the grammar of the matrix. The Hermetic tradition mapped it as correspondences. Kabbalah mapped it as the tree of life. Tantra mapped it as the body of Shakti. Taoism mapped it as the patterns of change. The Enochian work of John Dee and Edward Kelly acknowledged the scrying sessions of the 16th century, the angelic language, the Enochian tablets mapped it as a kind of living alphabet in which reality writes itself. These are not competing maps. They are the same territory surveyed from different starting points. The 7 densities. The matrix does not have a single texture. It has layers, not stacked like floors of a building, but nested like frequencies of light, all present in the same space, each only visible to the kind of consciousness tuned to receive it. The EnochianMatrix describes 7 densities of manifestation, from the void's edge to the physical world. The first density is the density of pure information, the void's intelligence before it has taken any form. This is what some traditions call the Akashic field, Theosophy and others acknowledged, the record that exists prior to events, the blueprint before the building. At this density, there is no time, no space, no individuation, only pattern. The second density is the density of pure energy, the generative principle in its first expression. This is what physics reaches toward in string theory and quantum field theory, the pre-particle level where energy vibrates into the first signatures of form. Many traditions speak of a plane of light that precedes matter. This is it. In Kabbalah, it corresponds to the world of Atziluth, the world of emanation, acknowledged. In anthroposophy, it echoes the Saturn period of cosmic evolution, warmth before light before matter, acknowledged. The third density is the density of archetypal mind, the level at which pure energy begins to organize itself around stable patterns, the patterns that will eventually become everything we recognize, the pattern of a star, the pattern of a cell, the pattern of a thought. This is the Platonic realm of forms, acknowledged, the Kabbalistic world of Bariah, the realm of the archetypes in Jungian psychology, acknowledged as a secular parallel, the Sambhogakaya in Buddhism. This is the territory that visionaries and mystics enter when they go deep enough. Not the physical world and not the formless void, but the middle realm where the shapes of all things live before they take physical form. The fourth density is the density of living pattern, what Steiner called the etheric, acknowledged. The level at which archetypes take on life force, the animating current that distinguishes the living from the inert. Traditional Chinese medicine works at this level, qi, acknowledged. The yogic system maps it as prana and the nadis, acknowledged. The Hawaiian Huna tradition maps it as mana, acknowledged. The EnochianMatrix treats the etheric not as a poetic metaphor, but as a literal layer of the matrix with its own mechanics, its own laws, its own pathology and health. The fifth density is the density of individuation, the astral level in classical occult terminology, acknowledged, the realm of emotion, desire, and the particular coloring that makes one soul distinct from another. This is where identity lives. Not the body's identity, but the soul's. In anthroposophy, this is the astral body proper, acknowledged. In Sufism, it corresponds to the nafs, the soul in its various stages of refinement, acknowledged. The EnochianMatrix treats the emotional body at the fifth density not as inferior to higher densities, but as the primary instrument of navigation. Emotion in this system is not noise, it is signal. The astral plane's language is feeling. The sixth density is the density of pure consciousness, individuated awareness, the self that knows it is a self. This is what Vedanta calls the Atman, acknowledged, the individual soul understood as identical in nature with Brahman, the universal. This is the seat of what Steiner calls the ego in its highest sense, acknowledged. Not the ego of psychology, but the I am. The the capacity for self-recognition. This is what the Enochian tradition has always meant by the angelic, not winged creatures with personalities, but intelligences operating at the sixth density, where consciousness is the medium and form is entirely fluid. The seventh density is the density of return, the point at which individuated consciousness, having traversed all six densities, is transparent to the void from which it came. This is what various traditions call enlightenment, moksha, liberation, union, henosis, fana. Not the destruction of the individual self, but its recognition as the void experiencing itself. The practitioner of the Enochian matrix does not begin their work expecting to reach the seventh density in this lifetime, but they orient toward it. It is the pole star of the entire system. The grammar of the matrix: pattern, resonance, correspondence. If the matrix has a grammar, a set of consistent structural laws, what are those laws? The Enochian matrix identifies three primary ones, which it calls pattern, resonance, and correspondence. Pattern is the law that the matrix expresses the same structures at every scale. The spiral of a galaxy and the spiral of a nautilus shell and the spiral of DNA are not coincidence. They are the same pattern operating at three different densities. This is the Hermetic principle as above, so below, acknowledged, but stated more precisely. The same intelligence that generates form at the cosmic scale, generates form at the biological scale, generates form at the atomic scale. The pattern is not copied, it is expressed. This is what fractal geometry describes mathematically, and what indigenous knowledge systems describe cosmologically, multiple traditions acknowledged collectively. Resonance is the law that like recognizes like across the density layers. When a practitioner's consciousness vibrates at a particular frequency, it draws toward it, or becomes permeable to, all other expressions of that frequency in the matrix. This is the functional principle underlying synchronicity, Jung acknowledged. Underlying sympathy magic across virtually every indigenous and esoteric tradition. Underlying the Sufi teaching that the heart is a receiver tuned to divine frequencies, acknowledged. The Enochian matrix treats resonance not as mystical poetry, but as the literal mechanism by which consciousness navigates the field. Correspondence is the law that everything in the matrix is in relationship to everything else, and those relationships have stable structure. The planets correspond to metals, correspond to organs, correspond to emotional states, correspond to musical intervals. Not arbitrarily, but because all of them are expressions of the same underlying density patterns. This is the bedrock of Hermeticism, acknowledged, of astrology in its mature forms, acknowledged, of the Kabbalistic system of Sephirot as a map of correspondences, and of the Enochian system itself, which is, at its deepest level, a map of the matrix's own correspondence structure. Part 4. The human being. The fractal. The bridge, the witness. You are not a drop in the ocean. You are the entire ocean in a drop, Rumi acknowledged. What the human being is. The human being is three things simultaneously, and none of these three can be understood without the other two. The human being is a fractal of the void, a complete expression of the whole in a bounded form. Not a piece of the void, not a fragment, but a complete holographic instance of it. The way a holographic plate contains the full image in every piece of itself, every human being contains the full structure of the void, the polarity, the field, and all 7 densities, in the space of a single body and a single lifetime. This is not metaphor. It is the central technical claim of the Enochian matrix. The human being is not a small thing that occasionally catches glimpses of a large thing. The human being is the large thing, temporarily believing itself small. The human being is a bridge, the only class of being in this cosmic architecture that exists simultaneously at all 7 densities. The physical body is 1st density matter, shaped by 4th density life force, shaped by 5th density individuation, shaped by 6th density consciousness, all the way back to the void. No other being in the matrix, not what traditions have called angels, not what they have called elementals or nature spirits, not what various traditions have called higher dimensional entities, inhabits all 7 densities at once. Angels, in the technical Enochian sense, operate at the 6th density and above. Elementals operate at the 3rd and 4th. Plants inhabit the 1st through 4th with extraordinary depth. Animals, the 1st through 5th. The human being alone spans the full spectrum. This is not a statement of human superiority. It is a statement of human function. The bridge exists to connect what would otherwise not touch. The human being is the void's self-witness, the mechanism by which the void knows itself from the inside of its own creation. This is why the void generated this particular kind of being at this particular kind of crossroads planet. Not because humans are the only form of consciousness in the cosmos. The Enochian matrix does not make that parochial claim. But because the human form is suited to a specific function, to be the point at which the matrix becomes conscious of itself through the experience of seeming separate from itself. The joy of the mystic, the grief of the lost, the love of two people, the anguish of the dying. All of it is the void feeling what it is like to be inside its own creation, in a body that forgets it is the void, and then, the moment of moments, remembers. Se. The human body as cosmological architecture. The human body is not a vessel the soul uses. It is a cosmological instrument, built according to the same architectural principles as the matrix itself, designed to operate across all 7 densities simultaneously. To understand the body as the Enochian matrix understands it is to understand a precision instrument of extraordinary complexity. The physical body, bones, organs, nervous system, endocrine system, operates at the 1st through 3rd densities. It is the matrix at its most compressed, the void's intelligence expressed in carbon and electricity. It is not lower or less than the subtler bodies. It is the densest possible concentration of the same intelligence that generates galaxies. The Enochian matrix borrows from anthroposophy, acknowledged, the insight that the physical body, properly understood, is more than it appears. It is the inscription of the cosmos in miniature, the etheric body, the life body, the field of vital force that animates and organizes the physical, operates at the 4th density. It is the difference between a living organism and an identically composed arrangement of chemicals. Traditional Chinese medicine, Ayurveda, and most indigenous healing systems work primarily at this level, and the Enochian matrix takes their mapping seriously. The meridians, the nadis, the chakras, acknowledged collectively, are not cultural inventions. They are descriptions of the 4th density etheric architecture of the human being. They converge across traditions, not because one borrowed from another, but because they are all describing the same structure from different starting points. The astral body, the emotional soul body, operates at the 5th density. This is the body that feels. Not in the neurological sense, though the neurological system is its physical correlate. In the ontological sense, the astral body is the instrument through which the human being participates in the matrix's emotional intelligence. The Enochian matrix makes a strong claim here, departing from traditions that treat emotion as an obstacle to spiritual development. The astral body is not something to transcend, it is something to develop. The capacity for feeling, in its full range, from grief to ecstasy, is not a limitation of the human condition. It is the human being's primary navigational instrument in the matrix. The traditions that honored this fully include the Sufi path of the heart, acknowledged, the tantric understanding of emotions as the energies of awakening rather than its obstacles, acknowledged, the African traditional emphasis on feeling as spiritual knowledge, acknowledged collectively, and the mystical Christian tradition at its depths, acknowledged. The ego body, in the anthroposophical sense, the I am, the self-knowing principle, operates at the 6th density, acknowledged as Steiner's precise contribution. This is not the ego of psychology. It is the capacity of the human being to say from a ground of genuine awareness, I am. Not I think or I feel, but the pure first-person existence that precedes thinking and feeling. This is the Atman in Vedantic terms, acknowledged. It is the divine spark in Gnostic terms, acknowledged. The Enochian matrix treats this not as an achievement to be reached, but as the human being's constant nature, temporarily obscured. The problem: forgetting. If the human being is a fractal of the void, a bridge spanning all densities, and the void's self-witness, why does the human being so rarely operate as these things? Why is the dominant human experience not ecstatic recognition, but confusion, fear, and the chronic sense that something is missing? The Enochian matrix calls this the forgetting, not the fall. That narrative carries too much theological freight. Not the veil, though that metaphor has its uses. Forgetting, Because what has been lost is not something the human being never had. It is something the human being is and has lost awareness of being. The forgetting is not accidental. It is structural. The conditions that allow the human being to function as a bridge require that for a period, the human being is fully convinced it is only the densest layer of itself. You cannot bridge two things if you are simultaneously fully aware of both. The bridge would dissolve into the all-at-onceness of it. The incarnation requires a degree of forgetting in order to function as an incarnation. The void steps into the body and forgets it is the void, so that it can experience what it is like to be a body. The forgetting is not punishment. It is the mechanism of the experience. The problem arises when the forgetting becomes total, when the human being does not merely forget temporarily, but becomes so fully identified with the densest layer of itself, the body, the personality, the story of the self as a separate object in a world of other objects, that the possibility of remembering becomes inaccessible. This is what various traditions have called the sleep, Gurdjieff acknowledged, the matrix of illusion, Maya in certain Hindu interpretations, acknowledged, the prison of the archons, Gnosticism, acknowledged, samsara, Buddhism, acknowledged, the separation from God, Abrahamic traditions, acknowledged, the modern condition of alienation, secular philosophy, acknowledged. The EnochianMatrix is not interested in assigning blame for the forgetting. It is interested in the mechanics of remembering. This is why the system exists. Not to explain the void. The void does not need explanation. To map the path from forgetting back to recognition, from the periphery back to the center, from the belief that you are only a body to the direct experience of being a void fractal bridge witness in a body. The path is not an escape from the body. It is a deepening into the body, all the way through its densest layer and out the other side, into the full 7-density reality of what you are. The return, the omega point, and why it is the same as alpha. The end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time. T.S. Eliot, acknowledged I. The purpose of the cosmos. The void generated the cosmos not because it needed to, not because it was incomplete, not because it was lonely or bored or driven by any lack. The void generated the cosmos because the nature of infinite fullness is to overflow. This is the Neoplatonic principle of emanation. Plotinus acknowledged. Not creation ex nihilo, but overflow from excess. The one overflows into the nous, overflows into the soul, overflows into matter. Not because the one decided to, because overflow is what infinite fullness does. The purpose of the cosmos, then, is not external to itself. The cosmos does not exist to serve some purpose beyond it. It exists because it cannot not exist. The void's nature is generative, and what the generative generates is the matrix of all possible experience, and what experience does, the whole arc of it, from the first photon to the last mystic, is returned to the void, carrying the fullness of what was discovered along the way. The cosmos is the void's journey from itself to itself, through the long, strange territory of form. The human being is the most concentrated expression of this journey. In one lifetime, a single human being can traverse, not always consciously, but always structurally, the distance from dense material identification to void recognition. The 7 densities are present simultaneously. The work is learning to be consciously present at all of them, not by leaving the body, but by widening the bandwidth of awareness until the body is recognized as what it is. The void at its most specific, most committed, most beautifully precise. The omega. The omega of the EnochianMatrix is not a place the practitioner goes after death. It is not an event that happens to history. It is a state of recognition that becomes available to consciousness when consciousness ceases to identify exclusively with its densest layer. The omega is the moment, and it is always a moment, not a permanent achievement to be locked in and defended when the human being knows itself as what it is. Fractal, bridge, witness. The void looking at itself through the lens of a particular body in a particular time in a particular culture with a particular story, and knowing, not intellectually, but in the way that water knows it is wet, that the lens and the looking and the void are all the same thing. This is what the traditions have called enlightenment, Buddhism, moksha, Hinduism, fana, Sufism, annihilation in the divine, henosis, Neoplatonism, theosis, Christian mysticism, Devakut, Kabbalah, cleaving to God, Rigpa, Dzogchen, and many others, all acknowledged. The Enochian matrix does not claim that its Omega and these traditions' endpoints are identical in every technical detail. It claims they are recognizing the same territory from different approaches. A mountain seen from the north and from the south is the same mountain. The difficulty is that no one has stood on all sides simultaneously. The Enochian matrix attempts to be a system in which a practitioner can approach from any direction and find the path home. Why alpha and omega are the same? Here is the final claim of BookZero, and it is the claim the entire system rests on. The beginning and the end are not 2 points on a line. They are the same point, approached from the inside and the outside of the same circle. The void from which everything arose is the same void that everything returns to. Not because everything goes back to the beginning after traveling a long way, but because the journey and the destination are identical in nature. The void was never absent. The forgetting was never total. The separation was always already complete reunion, seen from inside the experience of separation. The practitioner of the Enochian matrix does not work toward something they do not yet have. They work toward recognition of something they have always been. The practice is not construction, it is excavation. Not building a new self, but uncovering the self that was never not there, under the accumulated sediment of the forgetting. Alpha, the void, before everything. Omega, the recognition of the void, from the inside of everything. The same. This concludes BookZero. The subsequent books of the Enochian matrix will address in sequence the practice of moving consciously through the 7 densities, the initiatory structure of development through this system, the body as a cosmological instrument in detail, the relationship between the individual practitioner and the collective human journey, the traditions in their own depth, death, continuity, and what the matrix is between lives, and the work of the present moment, what this cosmology asks of a practitioner alive right now in this particular chapter of the Cosmic Library. What has been laid here is the ground. Return to it when the later books feel abstract or ungrounded. Everything that follows is contained, in seed form, in the void and its first movement, Alpha, Omega, a note on sources. The Enochian matrix draws from the full spectrum of human esoteric wisdom. The traditions named throughout this document, Taoism, Kabbalah, Advaita Vedanta, Mahayana Buddhism, Dzogchen, Gnosticism, Neoplatonism, Sufism, Hermeticism, Anthroposophy, Theosophy, Tantra, Kashmirivism, Ifa, and African traditional religion, theology and goddess theology, traditional Chinese medicine, Ayurveda, Hawaiian Huna, and others, are acknowledged as fellow cartographers of the same territory. None of them are authorities over this system. All of them are honored as predecessors, contemporaries, and in some cases as more precise or more practiced in particular areas of the map. The Enochian matrix does not require the practitioner to adopt any of these traditions, to convert, to adopt their vocabulary, or to accept their specific metaphysical claims. The resonance maps throughout this document are offered for those who come from these traditions and wish to see their home territory reflected. For those who come with no tradition, the maps are offered as evidence that the territory is real. Many different human cultures, independently, found their way to the same mountains. Where this system draws most specifically and deliberately, it draws from the Enochian work of John Dee and Edward Kelly as a map of the matrix's own linguistic architecture, the Hermetic tradition for its principles of correspondence, Rudolf Steiner's anthroposophy for its precision around human development and the etheric astral ego-body structure, the Trika tradition of Kashmir Shaivism for its mechanics of how the void generates form, the Sufi tradition for its understanding of the heart as a cosmological instrument, the Dzogchen tradition for its directness in pointing at Rigpa, the Kabbalistic tradition for its architectural precision around the tree of life, the goddess theological current for insisting that the generative ground of reality is feminine, and the African traditional wisdom streams for their insistence that the sacred is present in the body, in the earth, in the specific, here, now. Nothing here is final. The Enochian matrix is a living system. It will be refined, corrected, expanded, and ultimately superseded. That is not a weakness. That is what a map does when the territory is better understood. The Enochian Matrix, Book Zero, The Void First Edition, 2026.